Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. The desert evening liked to pretend it was gentle. It spread a cooled veil across the basin, let the wind thread softly through the cottonwoods, and turned the sky the color of a peach split open. But Sarah Johnson knew better. She'd learned that after sundown, the sand still held teeth, and the dark had a way of making a person feel smaller than the world intended. So she moved quick, a wood yoke across her shoulders, and 2 dented pails knocking her knees, while her little brother Tom trotted behind with a tin dipper swinging from its string. "Don't splash," she told him without looking back. "I ain't," he said, and splashed anyway, because he was 7 and testing every rule like a fence post. They had come by the narrow path that cut along the ridge of prickly pear and creosote, the way their pa used to lead them, before the cough took him and the hard winter finished. What the fever started. Pa had called this path the safe ditch, a trickling gully that led down to Willow Creek. You could hear the creek before you saw it, a hush of water over stones, a sound that made a person breathe deeper. As they rounded the last bend, the world opened to a low bank, the cottonwoods leaning like tired men, roots sunk deep and white in places. Where the water had washed the earth clean. Sarah set the yoke on a flat rock with a relief that punched. A tiny grunt out of her. "Get the dipper clean, Tom. Don't use the mud side." "I know," he said, and wiped it on his shirt anyway, which made her sigh but not scold. Some fights weren't worth the dust they kicked up. She knelt, dipped the first pail, and watched the whirls of silt unfold like smoke, dimming her own reflection. Her face had sharpened since Pa passed, the baby-soft cheeks gone to angles, the eyes old when she forgot not to look that way. She let the water run cold over her wrists, and for a moment the ache in her arms eased. "Reckon Ma'll be up late." "Again," Tom said. "She was counting beans by lamp this morning." "She'll sleep when the book balances," Sarah said automatically, because that was what Ma always said. She filled the second pail and set it by the first. "Hold still, Tom. Hear that?" "What?" She cocked her head. There it was. Again something that wasn't water, wasn't the wind in the cottonwoods, wasn't the rasp of a cricket or the shy rustle of a quail. A weight on brush, a stagger. The tiny hairs on her arms rose. Tom's hand found hers without looking. "Cougar?" Cougar would follow quiet. She listened again, slow and careful. The sound came from the far side of the creek, in the stand of saltbush and mesquite. A wet branch snapped. Then a figure lurched into view. He was tall, even bent over. His hair, black as a crow's wing, had matted with dust and blood, and just above his ribs, his buckskin shirt was torn and stuck dark to the flesh. His legs trembled under him like a colt's after a hard run. He took another step, shoulders flinching against pain, and for a heartbeat, Sarah saw the man he was under the wound straight-backed, proud, eyes like iron cooled in water. Then he swayed. "Apache." Tom breathed, the words slivering through his teeth. They had seen Apaches at a distance, shadows on a high ridge. A band of riders crossing the basin one winter morning like a line of smoke, and once 2 men trading meat for coffee and salt at the general store under Sheriff Holt's hawk stare. Ma had told them to keep their eyes to their own business. The schoolmaster had called them dangerous. Pa had said only this: people got reasons for the way they live. Don't judge a man by the stories told by folks who never had to be him. Man by the creek took another step. Blood slicked down to his belt. His gaze swept once across the children, more tired than fierce, as if he were measuring whether they were real or just the heat playing tricks. His lips shaped a word that didn't come. Tom tugged at Sarah's sleeve, with fingers gone cold. "We should run." "If we run, he falls," Sarah said, and she didn't know how she knew that. Only that she did. She set the pails down and stood, hands open, the way you approached a skittish horse. "Sir," she said, voice steady, "we won't hurt you." His eyes flickered, surprised a quick flare of life through the pain. He put one hand out, palm down, not quite a plea, not quite a warning. When he spoke, it was the thought of a word broken short. Water. Tom. Sarah didn't look away from the man. Dipper. Tom's feet tangled, but he scrambled and dunked the dipper, water sloshing over his knuckles. He passed it up with both hands. Sarah took it and stepped close enough to see the shallow flutter of the stranger's breath. She raised the dipper, and for a second he hesitated, pride or caution, then bent and drank with small, careful swallows. Up close she could smell him, dust, horse, sore flesh, and the faint, clean tongue of sage that clung to his hair. The dipper emptied. The man straightened a fraction. The world swam in and out of focus for him. Sarah could see it. She glanced at the wound. The shirt had torn jagged, and beneath, the flesh looked scraped and bruised. The kind of hurt a bullet left when it tore a furrow instead of burying itself. There was blood, yes, but not the bright welling kind that meant a long goodbye. "Tom," she said again, quietly now. "Our cloth." He stared like she'd asked him to cut off his own ear. "Mal, our cloth." They kept a square of old sheet in the bottom of a pail for scrapes. Tom fumbled it out, already damp from creek water. He passed it to Sarah, who tied a knot in it with her teeth and hands. The man watched, eyes shuddering and unshuddering, like he was trying to hold the world steady. When Sarah stepped close, he flinched, but only because of the pain. His hands never rose to stop her. "This'll sting," she murmured, and the absurdity of talking to a full-grown warrior, like he was Tom with a skinned knee, struck her. But the words came anyway, soft and ordinary, like at the hearth. She laid the cloth over the wound and pressed. Heat leaped up through the fabric. The man sucked in breath through his teeth, jaw clamped tight. For a long moment, the only sounds were water and breath and the distant, lonesome call of a coyote. "Sarah," Tom said, "someone's coming." At first she heard nothing but the drum in her ears. Then, very far off, the echoing slap of hooves. Not close yet, not right. But the basin carried sound like a tin carries a pebble. It rattled far. Riders or a single, hard traveler. She thought of Sheriff Holt's posters nailed crooked on the mercantile wall, of the stories traded like seed raids, reprisals, warnings thrown like stones across fences. Her throat tightened. The stranger's gaze flicked uphill, then back to the children. His face changed, hardly more than a shift of breath. He tried to straighten. One knee buckled. He would have gone down hard if Sarah hadn't thrown her shoulder. Under him, "Tom," she said, and her voice didn't sound like hers because it had no room left for fear. It was all bone. "Get the pails safe on the bank. We'll need them. Then get on the other side of him. We have to move him off the open. Sarah, I know." Tom swallowed, nodded once, and did exactly as he was told. That was the thing about Tom. He could be a thorn in the thumb all day, and then, when it mattered, he was a steel nail. They didn't have the strength to lift the man. They had the stubborn to try. The stranger did most of the work himself, pushing through a fit of shaking that made sweat bead on his lip. They got him under the shade of the cottonwoods, among the low roots and high grass. Sarah eased him down, with the care you use to set a full jar. She pressed the cloth again. Tom returned with the pails and set them within reach. The hoofbeats faded. The basin gave them back their quiet. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Her arms trembled from more than effort. "You're all right," she said, mostly because she needed the words out in the world. The stranger's eyes had softened. Not gentle, nothing about him was gentle but quiet. He pointed at the cloth, and then at the creek. A question in the gesture. "I'll wash it," Sarah said, and when she drew the cloth back, she saw that the worst of the bleeding had slowed. The wound oozed at the edges, but had stopped its fierce running. "Tom, clean cloth. Rinse this with the clear." "I can do it," Tom said, pride stinging him back into his skin. He took the strip and waded to the shallows where the water slid over clean pebbles. He scrubbed and wrung, as if he could wash out the fear too dark. Sarah used the hem of her calico skirt to dab the stranger's temple where dust and sweat had pasted together. His skin was hot, but not fevered. He watched her with an expression she didn't know how to read yet measure. Gratitude, the humble resentment of a strong man being forced to accept help. He tried again for English. He tapped his chest, then the ground, then pointed toward the west where the low hills sat like sleeping buffalo. There. The word came like a splinter pulled the wrong way. He winced, then made a shape with his hand, 2 fingers in a V, stepping quick riders. He cast his eyes up the valley, then shook his head and closed them against a wave of hurt. "You came from there," Sarah said, following his gesture. "And riders were behind." She nodded to show she understood. "We'll keep you hid a while." The promise slipped from her before she could see its shape, as natural as breathing, and once it was out, she could not pull it back. He opened his eyes, and this time there was no mistaking what moved through them. Not fear, not the hard watchfulness of a man on the edge of fight. It was trust, cautious and thin, like the first green shoot after rain. Tom splashed back with the rinsed cloth, mouth set in a brave line. "You think Ma'll hear us if we hurry?" "We're not telling Ma yet," Sarah said, and the words tasted like treason. But Ma had enough to carry, and Sarah couldn't picture bringing a wounded Apache into the kitchen and asking for the good needle and more linen. "We'll get him to the chew. Old barn, the back stall. It's dry and close. Then we'll figure the rest." Tom gaped. "The barn? But, Tom." She put a hand on his shoulder, squeezed. "You remember the sick calf last spring, the one we kept quiet so Ma wouldn't fret? We can do this." The calf weren't a person. "No," she said. He weren't a person. She met Tom's eyes until she saw his climb down. "Help me." They made a sling of sorts with the cloth and the yoke, a contraction that would have made their pea grin and shake his head. The stranger understood before they finished tying it. He levered himself up, teeth clenched, and set his forearm across Sarah's shoulders, the weight of him startling but not crushing. Tom took the other side, small but wiry. Together they rose in lurching inches. "Slow," Sarah said. "We'll take the long way, under cover." They moved, a strange 3-legged beast, under the cottonwoods. The grass stroked their shins. Grasshoppers sprang like thrown green coins. Overhead the first bat of the evening scribbled across the bruised sky. Each step was its own world. Each breath counted. Sarah said the multiplication tables in her head like a prayer. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6, just to give her mind something steady while her body did the work. They paused at the edge of the trees, where the creek path opened to the slope back to their place. The homestead lay a little over a 1/4 mile off, snugged into a fold of land that cupped it from the worst of the winds. The cabin's roof caught a last wink of light. Beyond it, the old barn leaned like an old man considering a chair. "See anyone?" Tom whispered, "No." The basin had gone to blue-gray, the kind of light that hid and revealed in the same breath. "We go now." They took the deer path that hugged the wash, low and narrow, where mesquite and saltbush made a tunnel of scents, green, sharp, resinous. Once, a rabbit shot out, and Tom flinched so hard he nearly dropped the yoke. The stranger's breath came ragged. Once he stumbled, and a sound made itself in his throat, the shape of a groan, but he throttled it back with what looked to Sarah like anger. Pride, she thought, not unkindly. He's got pride like a spine. Halfway up, she felt the tremble begin in her own legs, the jelly ache that said enough. She bit the inside of her cheek and tasted iron, and when she let the breath out, it came, with a little whine she couldn't catch in time. The stranger heard it. He shifted, taking more of his own weight, and for an instant she saw him as he would be without the hurt solid as a cottonwood, the kind of man who could lift a beam alone. Almost, she said. Just a few more. They topped the wash, and saw the back fence and the shadowed mouth of the barn beyond. A locust clicked from the cottonwood by the corner. The cabin window showed no lamplight yet. Ma must still be at Mrs. Adler's, trading eggs for flour and news. The world held its breath. Go, Sarah said. They crossed the last stretch at a stiff-legged half-shuffle. It would have looked comical if you ignored the blood. Tom slid the barn door just wide enough to slip through. The smell of old hay and leather rose like a memory of summer. They eased the stranger onto a heap of clean straw in the last stall, where the boards were good and the roof didn't leak. When he settled, the fight drained out of him all at once. He lay with his eyes open, breathing fast, every line of him. Alert and spent at the same time, thought Sarah, wrung the cloth out for the last time, folded it neat, and pressed it back to his side. "We're here," she said, and realized it was the second promise of the evening she had not planned. "We'll fetch what you need. Quiet. No one'll know." Tom hovered, hands twisting, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall. Finally, he blurted, "What do we call you?" "I mean, sir, we need a name." The man blinked, slow. His mouth moved. A word began and broke, a syllable lost in the dry. He closed his eyes and shook his head once. Then he reached for Tom's wrist gentle, mindful of fear, and tapped it twice, light as a father tapping a child's nose in a game. He managed the ghost of a smile. It undid something clenched in Sarah's chest. "All right," she said softly, as if making a note in a ledger. "We'll ask later." Outside, a horse whickered far down the road, a simple sound that could have been anyone, or no one at all. The coming night thickened, and across the basin the first stars kindled. Patient and unbothered by the small, fierce plans of people, Sarah tucked the edge of the cloth, tested the knot. "Tom, fill the second pail and bring it to the stall. Then we'll take turns. We'll fetch bread and the old blanket, and Ma's needle and thread if she doesn't notice. We'll make it right as we can." Tom nodded, solemn suddenly, like a boy at church. "Yes, Sarah." The stranger watched them both, his gaze moving between their faces as if he were learning them by heart. He lifted his hand a few inches from the straw and let it fall, a weary thank you in the echo of the gesture. Then his eyes slid closed. Not asleep, not yet, but resting at the edge of it, trusting the line would hold. Sarah stood and listened for hoofbeats, for Ma's footsteps on the path, for the creak of the world tilting under what they'd just chosen. All she heard was water, far away, like a promise you could carry cupped in both hands if you were careful. She looked down at Tom, then at the man they had dragged out of the creek's shadow, and knew without anyone telling her that the night had split their lives into before and after. "Come on," she whispered. "Quiet now." They moved through the dim, two small figures with a task too big for them, and yet it fit. In the stall's half-light, the wounded Apache breathed and did not bleed, and the barn, old as their grief and sturdy as their stubborn, took them all in and held its peace. The barn kept their secret, the way old wood keeps the scent of rain quietly, stubbornly, as if it had always known how. All that night, the rafters listened while two children moved in the half-dark with the ceremony of thieves. Sarah fetched the old blanket from the bottom of the trunk, the one Ma never used, because moths had left it a constellation of holes, and Tom brought a stub of candle and the blue enameled cup Pa once kept for coffee. They worked by the candle's small gold lake, their breath puffing in little ghosts in the cool air. Sarah boiled water in the cabin, counting the seconds like a miser counts coins, and carried it to the barn in the kettle, wrapped in a rag so it would not burn her hands. Tom stood guard, peeking through a crack in the barn door for a lantern swing or a ray, shape on the road that might be Ma. The stranger drifted in and out. When the pain gripped, his fingers bit the straw. When it passed, his face smoothed into something fine and plain that made him look young. Sarah cleaned around the wound with boiled water and the cloth they'd used at the creek, squeezing each rinse back into the blue cup to see if the color ran brighter. She was careful as prayer, and when her hands shook, she hid them behind work. "Drink," she told him, lifting the cup to his mouth. Small swallows. He did as she said. When his eyes opened again, he watched her with a question that was also a thanks. His gaze went to Tom then, measuring the boy's nearness, the boy's fear stowed behind a busy mouth. "What's your name?" Tom whispered, still too shy to be bold, but too curious to be quiet. The man wet his lips. "Nan Pan." The word came dry and rough but true. He touched his chest. "Nantin." Then he made a small claw of his fingers and breathed, "Lupo," round and soft, as if it were a sound that didn't belong to this place. "Lupo?" Tom echoed. "Like a wolf?" The man nodded. He was too tired to explain more, but later, when the candle had guttered to a curve of wax, he added, almost to himself, "White trader. Call me that, Wolf." Sarah set the cup down, the name settling inside her like a stone that fit the hand just so. Nantin. Wolf. It suited him, the watchfulness, the hurt taken private, the way his eyes moved before his body did. Ma came home after moonrise. They heard her boots on the path, the soft clunk of the latch, the scrape of a chair drawn across the floor. Sarah had scrubbed the kettle and set it where it always lived. Tom had scattered extra straw over the barn floor to confuse the marks of a body being dragged. In the cabin, Sarah found Ma slicing a small onion into a chipped bowl, the knife rhythmic and calm. "You're late," Ma said without looking up. "Mrs. Adler's hens have taken to hiding their eggs, and she swears she saw coyote tracks by the fence. How much water do you bring?" "2 pails," Sarah said, steady, and washed the tin dipper. "Good girl." Ma's eyes flicked to Tom, who hovered like guilt. "You all right, boy? You look like you sat on a tack." "Fine," Tom said. Too fast. Ma's knife paused. A muscle in her cheek shifted. Then she went back to slicing, and if she felt the tremor running under the room that wasn't there. That morning, she pressed it down under chores. "Sleep. We're up early. Mrs. Adler wants me tomorrow again, and the north fence needs mending." "Yes, Ma." They CHORUSED. They slept like people who had a secret sleeping with them. Every creak was a call. Every breeze down the chimney was a voice. Sarah dreamed of water that would not fill a bucket. When the first pale coins of daylight slid between the shutters, she was already sitting up. They timed their morning like a drill. Tom fed the chickens slow and loud in case Ma was listening. Sarah took bread and 2 wrinkled apples and slipped them into her apron. She told Ma she would fetch kindling. She fetched it too, piling it by the hearth, and when Ma turned to the stove, Sarah slid through the back door and crossed the yard with the kindling on top, and the food buried under it like treasure. In the barn, Nantin slept hard, the sleep that comes after a night that holds the worst of the pain. Sarah set the bread and apples by the stall and checked the cloth. The wound had seeped, but not badly. The skin around it was pink and hot at the edges, trouble if it spread. She wished then for Pa's quick hands, for the way he could look. At a cut can know what the body would do next. We need to keep it clean, she told Tom, who tiptoed as if the air were brittle. I heard Mrs. Adler say, once the old women in Tucson make a poultice of creosote leaves for bad scrapes. You going to walk to Tucson? Tom said, equal parts hope and horror. We got creosote by the ridge. She thought of the little, sticky oval leaves, the way they perfumed the air after rain, like the world remembering something sweet. I can boil some. And Miss Adler said prickly pear helps pulls heat from a sting. Maybe it'll draw the heat. She did not say maybe. It will not. A person's voice has to choose a side, sometimes by noon. The barn had the soft smell of medicine made from what the land gave. Sarah scorched a prickly pear pad over the stove flame to burn off the spines, peeled it with the spare knife until the slick green flesh was bare, and mashed it to a cool mucilage. She boiled creosote leaves until the water went the color of weak tea and smelt like thunder. She folded both into clean cloth and set the poultice over the wound. When Nanton woke to the touch of it, his first flinch faded into something like relief. Good, he said, and his voice even wrapped in. Weariness carried a note of approval that landed in Sarah's chest with a startling warmth. He tapped the poultice. Good. He ate the crust they gave him, slow and fierce, not in teeth, but in gratitude. He broke a piece small and handed it back to Tom, a gesture that turned the bread from a meal into a bargain. Tom's face went bright, and he took it as solemnly. As if he were being sworn in front of the Sheriff Dot, they learned to talk around the edges of language. Water needed no words. For pain, Nanton would lay his hand flat and tip it side to side so, and when it sharpened, he would knife his fingers in the air with a grimace. For danger, his whole body became the word. He would go still as stone, eyes cutting. To the door, and even Tom knew not to breathe then. For thank you. He pressed his palm to his chest, then lifted it toward them, and when Tom mimicked the gesture, something unknotted in the room. On the second morning, he asked slowly, with the kind of patience that means a person has had to teach a lot of children to see the knots Tom used on the gate. Tom blushed because his knots were reliable mostly by accident, but he fetched the length of rope they kept for the mule and held it out. Nantan studied it with an attention that made even rope feel seen, and then he took the free end and fashioned a loop that seemed to tie itself, neat and snug. They held when Tom leaned and loosened when he thumbed it. Bolin, Tom said proudly, because he had heard Pa say it once. Nanton nodded. He made it again, slow enough to show. Rabbit, he said, poking the end up through the loop. Tree, he circled the standing part. Home. He sent the end back down the hole and pulled it tight. Tom laughed out loud for the first time in 2 days, all fear blown clean by learning Dot. By the third day, Nanton sat up without the world veering under him. He could cross the stall in 3 unsteady paces and sit on the upturned crate. He watched the open gap at the top of the stall as if it were a window on a mountain pass. Sarah noticed how his gaze never moved without his ears moving too. He listened to the barn the way she listened to Ma's voice for what it did not say. Late that afternoon, they heard the clatter of hooves on the road, several horses at once, the cadence of men riding with a purpose. Sarah saw the way Nanton's eyes narrowed and his jaw smoothed. Without a word, he shifted off the crate and into the back corner of the stall, where the boards were darkest and the straw piled higher. He sank into shadow with a skill that made Sarah's skin prickle. She tugged the stall gate half closed, and threw the old horse blanket over it as if airing it from a must mildew that wasn't their Dot. The riders slowed by the fence. Sheriff Holt's voice carried without effort. a man accustomed to his own echo. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called, and the way he stretched the last word made it sound like a question he intended to answer himself. "You seen anyone cutting across your land?" "Inge," he caught himself, glanced at Tom and Sarah, and remade the word. "Any strangers?" Ma stepped out onto the porch, apron stiff with flour. Her back was straight as the fence post she'd set herself last spring. "Good afternoon, Sheriff," she returned, polite because that was the currency of survival. "Just my children and the mule." "We're hunting a wounded Apache man." Holt tipped his hat, which did nothing to soften his eyes. "He took a graze near the wash. Could be dangerous." Ma's glance cut to her children and back. So small a movement you could miss it if you looked lazy. "I teach my boy and girl to be careful." "Sure you do," one of the deputies drawled, letting his gaze flit across the yard like a fly you let pester to see what it wants. "Tracks said he went down the creek side. He could be hid anywhere." He said the last word slow, hungry. Sarah felt Tom lean, just a hair, closer to her. She could feel his pulse in the space between them, or maybe it was hers, the two so tangled she couldn't tell them apart. In the stall, behind a blanket that smelled of old horse and trapped sun, Nanton did not stir. Even the straw around him seemed to have learned stillness. "You want water?" Ma asked, calm as beadwork. "It's a hot trail." Holt smiled with half his mouth. Wouldn't say no. Ma poured into the dipper, handed it up one by one, and kept the conversation in the small furrow of weather and road conditions, two topics with almost no edges. The men drank, wiped their mouths with the back of their hands, and scanned the yard as if their eyes were fingers that could pry up dirt. Holt's regard slid over the barn door and lingered, not because there was anything to see, but because a man like him trusted suspicion more than sight. "Mind if we take a look?" he asked, already angling his horse that way. "You can look all you please at the inside of my barn from the threshold," Ma said, and her voice, still polite, had put on boots. "The boards hold, Sheriff. I know because I set half of them myself. You put your boot through my hay, and you'll be buying me a new stack." He chuckled as if she'd made a joke. Never argue with a woman who knows her boards. But he did what all men do when asked to stand at the line. They extended a toe over it. He leaned from the saddle and peered into the barn's dim. He saw dust motes and an old harness and the long, friendly face of the mule who had wandered, and with hopes the world might offer oats. He did not see a man pressed to a corner with the patience of a rock. "Looks fine," he said at last, but he said it like a man promising himself he would come back. When they rode off, the yard reinflated. Ma watched them go until the dust settled, then turned to her children. "You two," she said, the words heavy with meanings indoors. "There's a lot of rattlesnakes in this world. Most of them are polite until they're not." She looked from Tom to Sarah, searching their faces like a map for the place where truth bent. "Stay out of trouble." "Yes, Ma," they said, and the yes was true, and also not, and May heard both truths and decided which one to hold with her teeth. That night, while the coyotes sang the low, drunk-sounding song they sang when the moon climbed fat, Nanton spoke more words than he had yet. He tapped the scar along his ribs, traced a line in the air. "Canyon," he said, his hand shaping the steep sides. He made 3 fingers, then closed one to a fist. "Soldiers." He mimed the crack of a rifle, the jerk of the body, the hiss of breath. He touched his chest, his shoulder, his leg, tallying old hurts with a bookkeeper's calm. Then he touched his chest again. "Alive," he said, and his smile was not a show of teeth, but of endurance. "Will your people come?" Sarah asked. He tilted his hand side to side. "Far," he said. He pointed west. "I go." Then he shook his head at himself. at the wound, at the days, and made a small circle the barn. "Wait, we'll get you strong," Tom said stoutly. And for once the promise felt as good to make as it was dangerous to keep. Days settled into a rhythm. In the morning, Sarah checked the wound less angry now, the heat gentled by the green slick of prickly pear and the bitter wash of creosote. She changed the cloth, washed it, boiled water. Tom brought straw, fetched water, practiced the bowline, until his hands could tie it behind his back without looking. In the afternoons, if Ma was at Mrs. Adler's, Nanten would step out into the slim aisle between stalls and teach without. Teaching Dot, he showed them how to listen for what wasn't there, the sudden quiet of birds that meant someone was walking. Beneath their chatter, he pressed their palms to the dirt and let them feel the slow hum of the earth mule hooves far off, a wagon rattling 2 ridges away. He led Tom to the fence and tapped the loose board, then showed him how to wedge a thin stone to make it hold until they could spare a nail. He taught Sarah a knot of her own, a hitch that made a rope snug around a post, but let go when you pulled the tail a certain way. And when she learned it, the pride she felt surprised her with its brightness. He carved a small wolf from a scrap of mesquite someone had left on the barn floor long ago. His hands, even stiff with hurt, moved sure. He gave it to Tom, who ran his thumb over the whittled ears until the wood shone. For Sarah, he threaded a feather he found caught high in a rafter onto a strip of leather cut from the ragged edge of his own shirt. "Wind," he said, as if saying, "Remember how it moves." Sometimes, when the light dropped blue and thin through the slats, Sarah saw his eyes go farther west than the sun. She did not ask what he saw. She had learned that adults carry landscapes. Inside them the children are not big enough to walk. Word in town grew louder, riding home on Ma's hem. "Posse went through the Ortiz place," Ma said one evening, untying her bonnet. "They found tracks. Holt says the man's not likely to last long. The desert cleans up its own messes." She did not put much weight on the last sentence. The way you say something because it is what people say when other ears can hear, and not because you want your children to believe the world is that simple. Sarah's stomach dropped as if she had stepped off a hidden ledge. She carried the feeling to the barn, set it down by the stall, and told it to be quiet. She touched the edge of the poultice. "We should plan," she said, "because a plan is a lamp you can carry into places you don't want to go." Nanton's mouth tipped into the small smile that meant he took her seriously. He nodded. He made 2 lines in the straw of the canyon, and the wash then marked a third, a narrow cut she and Tom called the safe ditch, but which he named with a word that trilled in his throat like water over stone. He drew a circle the barn, and then 3 dots, small and quick, leading to the scrub behind the old well. "Stash," Sarah said, understanding. "Food, water." Tom's eyes lit as if someone had handed him a spyglass. "A false trail," he said, and Nanton nodded, pleased. They packed a small tin with jerky and hardtack and set it under the flat rock by the well. They filled a canteen and muffled it in an old sock so it would not clink. Tom brushed out their tracks with a yucca frond, his face grave, and then Nanton showed them how to walk on the hard-pan stones where feet don't leave much of themselves behind. He tapped the nail head on the back gate so it would not catch. Light. He moved through their small world as if he could fold it and put it in his pocket. On the 7th morning, the wound looked less like a wound and more like a place the body remembered and mean to forget. The skin was knitting fine and clean. Nanton's color had climbed from sallow to something like sun-warmed clay. He stood without swaying. He strapped a strip of cloth around his ribs and set his hand to the stall rail. And Sarah saw the wolf in him again, the one that traveled far and returned to its path, as if the earth made it just for him. "I go soon," he said, and the words which should have felt like the end of danger, ran cold down Sarah's back. She did not want to keep him. He was not something you keep. But the space he would leave already ached like a bruise. "You'll need more bread." Tom said it gruffly, as if bread were a shield. "And a needle," Sarah added. "To stitch." "The shirt." Nanton touched his chest. "I come back," he said, surprising them both, and his eyes sparked at their faces. "If you need, you call, I come." He tapped his ear, then pointed toward the west. It made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. "Sarah?" Ma's voice came from the yard, close enough to clatter their hearts. "Tom, where've you got to?" Sarah's head jerked up. Tom spilled a handful of straw, then tried to catch it back from the air. Nanton stepped into the corner shadow without seeming to move. Sarah grabbed the empty bucket, thrust it at Tom. "The well," she hissed. "Now." To Nanton, she pressed her hand to her heart, and then toward him without thinking, their shared word for trust, then turned and ran for the light. "We were getting water," she called, breathless and ordinary. The fire was low. Ma eyed them a long second, took in the flush on their cheeks, the straw clinging to Tom's sleeve, the way Sarah's hair had escaped its braid. "Well, then get it," she said, which meant "I see you, and also, I'll let today be today." She turned to the fence line, where a loose wire sang a mean little song in the wind. "And fetch the pliers. We'll set that wire true before dark." "Yes." Ma. They worked until the light slanted steep and gold. They set the wire with the care of people who know cut fingers make everything slower. They ate a thin stew that tasted like memory of meat. They washed the bowls and set them upside down on the rough plank table. They said goodnight without needing to try to sound normal because they were too tired to sound like anything else. Back in the barn, the candle burned low. Nanton sat with his back against the stall, eyes half closed, breathing the slow, even breath of a man who has made his peace with the next day. Sarah sat opposite, knees drawn up under her chin, and Tom put his head on her shoulder and pretended. He was not doing that because he was almost 8 and too old for such things. "You saved him," Tom whispered, like it was a thing they had found and should put back before someone noticed. "We saved each other," Sarah said, and felt the truth land. Because since the evening by the creek, the house had felt less like a place with a hole in it, and the mornings had something steady in them besides chores. And when she looked at Tom, and he looked back, there was a shine to him that was not just fear turned into brag. The candle went out with a small blue sigh. In the dark, the barn breathed the long animal exhale of wood and straw and years. Outside, the wind combed the grass. Far away, a coyote yipped, then laughed like a drunk at a new joke. Closer, the wire on the north fence sang, true now, snug and clean. Nanton spoke into the dark. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow, Sarah." Echoed. Neither of them said what they both knew the word held: danger and leaving, and the kind of choosing you don't get to rehearse. But when Tom's breath fell into the deep, slow rhythm of sleep, and the first owl sent its question across the yard, Sarah felt the fear loosen its grip, just enough to breathe around it. Because tomorrow meant something else. It meant they were not alone. Asterisk, the air had that sharp copper taste it gets before a storm, though the sky was clear. Sarah knew it wasn't the weather. Trouble rode the land like a dust devil, twisting, unseen until it was too late. She felt it first when she was cutting strips of cloth for the morning poultice. The barn was quiet except for the steady scrape of Tom's knife against wood as he tried to carve a second wolf like the one Nanton had given him. Nanton sat on the stall rail, his ribs bound, his body straighter now, stronger. He watched the horizon through the gap in the boards, as if the land itself were a drumbeat only he could hear. Suddenly, his head tilted. His eyes sharpened. He lifted. One finger silenced. Sarah held her breath. At first there was nothing. Then distant, faint but sure, the rattle of hooves on dry ground. Not one horse, several. Riding in rhythm. Tom dropped the knife. Sheriff. Sarah's chest tightened. Nanton slid from the rail, his body moving with new steadiness, though his jaw clenched at the pull in his ribs. He crossed to the corner. Shadow, quick and quiet, and pressed his back to the boards. His hand rested near the knife at his belt, but he did not draw it. His eyes flicked to the children. Wait, stay calm. The riders appeared soon after, dust rising behind them in a pale cloud. The barn door was cracked just enough for Sarah to see through. She recognized Sheriff Holt instantly. Broad shoulders, hat tipped forward, jaw that seemed carved from rock and meanness. Behind him rode 4 men, rifles across their saddles. "Stay behind me," Sarah whispered to Tom, though her own knees felt weak as straw. The posse halted in the yard. Holt's eyes moved slow across the place, like a man inspecting cattle he might buy. He called out, voice thick with command, "Mrs. Johnson." Ma came out from the cabin, apron stiff with flour. Dust, face composed the way it always was when men with guns stopped at her gate. "Sheriff Holt. You've seen him, haven't you?" Holt said without greeting. Apache warrior, mid-30s, wounded, cut clean by a bullet, but still moving. Tracks lead this way. Ma didn't flinch. "All I've seen is dust and chores, Sheriff. You want to check my wash. You'll find nothing but laundry." The men chuckled, but Holt's eyes narrowed. "Barn, then?" Ma shifted, casual, though her shoulders set hard. "I've hay stacked neat. Mules in there. You start tromping through with your boots, you'll break boards I can't afford to mend." Holt dismounted anyway. "I'll take a look." Sarah's breath caught. She darted a glance at Nanton. He gave the barest shake of his head. "Don't move, don't fight, don't speak." The sheriff stepped inside the barn, slow, his boots loud on the dirt floor. Sunlight from the door stretched his shadow long across the straw. He walked the aisle, peered into stalls. His eyes flicked toward the back where Nanton crouched. For a heartbeat, Sarah thought he saw him, thought her heart would hammer itself into pieces. Then a sound split the air. Tom, quick as a rabbit, had dashed behind the barn and let out a shout. "Coyote by the well. Big one." Holt spun. "Where?" "Ran east." Tom pointed, his whole body convincing, the urgency of a boy who'd seen danger near the chickens. The men stirred. "Coyote'll take a calf if you let it," one muttered. Holt cursed, spat, and turned back. "Fine, mount up. We'll circle the ditch and see if the engine's using the cover." They left in a storm of hooves, dust swallowing their words. Only when the sound died to nothing did Sarah breathe again. She turned on Tom, anger and relief tangling. "You could have been shot." He grinned weakly, shoulders trembling. "You're welcome." Nanton stepped from the shadows. His face, though steady, carried a storm of its own. He laid his hand on Tom's shoulder and pressed once, firmly a warrior's thanks. Tom swallowed, eyes wide, and nodded. That night, they gathered in the barn's dim again, the candle burning low. Sarah's hands shook as she refolded the cloth for the wound. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Nanton shook his head. He pointed west, drew a line in the dirt his way out. Then another line from the barn toward town, the posse's path. They would cross soon enough. "I should go," he said in halting English. "Tomorrow." Sarah's throat closed. She had known this would come, but the knowing didn't soften the hurt. "You're not ready." He touched his ribs, then his heart. Ready or not, must. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the mules stamping outside. Tom kicked straw with his boot, fighting tears he would not let fall. "They'll kill you," he muttered. Nanta and crouched so his eyes met the boy's. "They kill if I stay. They kill if I run. But you," he tapped Tom's chest. "Live," then he tapped Sarah's. Strong. Sarah wanted to argue, to beg him to wait, to stay, to be the father she and Tom had lost. But she saw the fire in his gaze. He could not stay hidden like a trapped animal. Wolves were not meant for barns. Still, when the lantern outside flickered, Ma, moving in the cabin, unaware of the storm pressing close, Sarah whispered fiercely, "Then we'll help you, like you helped us." Nanton's eyes softened, pride and sorrow mingling. He nodded once, the agreement sealed, but in her heart, Sarah knew blood was coming. The horizon had promised it, and the horizon never lied. The morning they said goodbye began with silence, the kind that made Sarah's chest feel too tight. No birds sang in the cottonwoods. No breeze rattled the dry mesquite pods. Even the mule was still, as if the whole land was waiting. Sarah and Tom rose before Ma, slipping from their pallets with a care born of guilt and habit. They padded barefoot across the yard, carrying bread, jerky, and the last of the apples. The barn door gave its usual creak, and then there he was. Nantan, already standing, ribs bound neat, his face drawn but steady. His eyes had that faraway light again, the kind a person carries when the road is already under his feet. "You're leaving," Sarah said, though she'd known since the sheriff's visit that this day would come. "Yes." His voice was rough, but the word came whole. He touched his chest. "Thank you." Tom scowled, kicking straw. "You can't just go. They'll find you. Sheriff's got a nose like a bloodhound." Nanton tilted his head at the boy, almost a smile. "Wolf runs farther than hound." Tom's mouth twisted. He wanted to believe it, but did and single quotes T. Sarah pressed the bundle of food into Nanton's hands. "Here, bread's stale, but it'll last. The apples won't." Her throat felt raw, as though she'd swallowed sand. He accepted the gift with solemnity, as if it were gold. He divided the jerky at once, baking a strip and handing half back to Tom. Tom stared, then closed his fist around it like it was a medal. The plan had been simple. He would leave before the sun climbed too high, slip through the ditch, cross the ridge, and vanish into the western hills. The children would scatter their tracks, lead the posse elsewhere if they came. It sounded simple in whispers, in the hush of candlelight. In the daylight, with the barn wide open and the world too bright, it felt impossible. And then hoofbeats shattered the stillness. They came fast, hard, closer than anyone wanted Holt and his men, the sane dust cloud rolling toward the homestead. Sarah's heart leapt to her throat. "Go," she hissed. "Now." But Nanton didn't move. His gaze cut to the children, sharp as a hawk's. He shook his head. "No run," he said. "We make them run." Before she could protest, he moved. Though still stiff, his body carried strength born of resolve. He slid the stall gate closed behind him, pulled the blanket over it. No trace he'd been there. Then he crouched low in the shadows, a wolf ready to spring. The posse thundered into the yard. Holt swung down, boots crunching hard. "Morning." "Mrs. Johnson," he called, his voice oily as snake grease. "Your children about?" Ma stepped onto the porch, her back straight, her eyes cold. "They're fetching kindling." Sarah froze just inside the barn door. Tom pressed against her side. Holt's gaze swept the yard, then narrowed on the barn. "Tracks led here again. Apache's close. I can smell it." He started toward them. That was when Tom moved. Quick as a rabbit, he darted out the side, waving his arms. "Sheriff, I saw him, down by the wash." The men turned like a flock of spooked crows. Holt barked orders. 2 deputies spurred their horses east, chasing the phantom trail. Holt's eyes, though, stayed sharp, suspicious. He strode to the barn, hand on his revolver, Sarah's breath locked in her chest. She stood tall, stepping into the doorway before he could enter. "Sheriff, you can't just barge in. Our mule spooks easy." He sneered. "Little girl, you hiding something?" Before she could answer, the barn shadows shifted. Nanton rose. Behind her, silent as smoke, a presence that filled the space. His knife gleamed faint in the morning light. Holt's hand jerked toward his gun, but Sarah stepped sideways, blocking his view for a heartbeat. It was all the time Nanton needed. He lunged, not to kill but to disarm, his hand striking Holt's wrist with bone-snapping force. The revolver clattered into straw. Chaos erupted. Shouts, boots, the pounding of hooves as the deputies turned back at the sound. Tom, wild-eyed, grabbed the fallen revolver and ran with it, clutching it to his chest like stolen treasure. Nanton held Holt pinned, knife at his throat. For a frozen moment, everything stopped. Dust hanging in the air, Ma's sharp cry from the porch, Sarah's heart thundering so loud she thought the world must hear it. Then Nanton spoke, his voice low but steady. "Leave? No blood. No fight. Leave." The deputies reined in, rifles half raised, but Holt snarled, pride burning hotter than fear. "You'll never outrun us, Injun. You'll—" Nanton pressed the blade closer, silencing him. His eyes, though, flicked to Sarah and Tom. He was not thinking of escape now. He was thinking of them. Finally, Holt spat to the side. "Fine. Go. But next time, I'll put you in the ground." Nanton released him with a shove. Holt staggered, face red with fury, but he did not reach for the gun Tom held. He mounted, barked for his men, and they retreated, anger trailing like smoke. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. Sarah let out a sob she hadn't realized she was holding. Tom dropped the revolver into the dust, shaking. Ma came forward, her face pale but fierce. She looked at Nanton long, her eyes full of questions she did not speak. Finally, she said only, "Go, before they think twice." Nanton nodded. He stepped close to Sarah and Tom, kneeling so his eyes met theirs. He placed his hand over Sarah's. Heart, then Tom's. "Strong," he said. "Brave, my children." Tears stung Sarah's eyes. "Will we see you again?" He touched his chest, then pointed west. "Call. I come." And then he was gone, slipping into the scrub, vanishing toward the horizon like a shadow set free. For days, Sarah felt the emptiness of the barn, the silence where his presence had been. But she also felt something else, a steadiness inside. A strength she hadn't known was there. Tom walked taller, too, proud of the secret they carried. Nanton was not their father, not by blood, but in the way that mattered, in the way of teaching them courage, of standing between them and the world's cruelty. He had become what they had lost. And when coyotes cried at night, their voices wild and lonesome, Sarah and Tom would look at each other and smile, certain that somewhere out in the desert, the wolf was listening, watching, guarding them still.